Okay, hello, welcome to that video that I said I was going to make almost a year ago, following up on the history generator and some more explanation about what it actually is. This is going to be a brief introductory video. I'm going to talk more about it later, but that's going to be later because I have to actually figure out what I'm going to say because I don't actually remember everything. At any rate, I'm going to go over the controls for this first, and then we'll talk about actual stuff as it's running. So the first control is run until battle. Make simulation run until the first battle happens. The first battle will run. Then after the first battle is done running, the simulation will stop. Minimize battle windows. This one here, checkbox. If it's checked, that means any battle window. So normally when a battle starts, it'll pop up a window to show you the battle so you can watch what's going on. It's good fun. But if you're doing it in the background and you don't want to constantly have to deal with windows popping up in front of your face, then instead of having to deal with that, it'll just minimize it down here, and that way you can see it if you want, but you also don't have to see it. Religion, history, and world history, they won't do anything right now because I don't have any events, so obviously there's no history because there's no events because no time has passed. But if there were, and I clicked on it, I would be able to see a history of the religions or just the general history of my world. Zooms, which is the cell size, is the size of these little squares. If I click one of these squares, you can see it's, a thing. There's nothing there, so it's not that interesting, but this means that the cells are each 6 by 6 pixels. If I make it bigger, I make them 15 by 15 pixels, or even 20 by 20 pixels, you can see that they're much bigger. If I make it 4 by 4 pixels, then you can see everything is much smaller, obviously. Advanced step moves the simulation forwards one step, which is 1 month. Run continuously will run the simulation continuously until you uncheck the box. Simulation speed controls the number of milliseconds between steps. You can go from 1,000, which is a second, to 10 milliseconds. However, if you put it too low and you're doing run continuously, you might not be able to actually stop it because it could freeze up on you, or the controls could freeze. The simulation will keep going. Advanced by is you put a number in this box, and then the simulation will advance by that many years. So if I put 1,000, it'll pretty much be the same thing as run continuously. And one important thing, the console will show you all of the important events, so the ones that I judge to be, in air quotes, important. You could say other ones are important. If you want to see the full log, then you should go to the folder where you're running the program. There'll be a file called eventlog.txt. You go here and you can see all of the events. They're not in a very legible format, but they're, there. And finally, here, you can double click on these and they'll give you information. So we can see that while, let's find one that's easier to pronounce. This one's easier to pronounce. Yeah, so I'm working on the pronunciation of the names, but it's kind of, it's kind of hard to randomly generate languages and then randomly generate words from those languages and still make them pronounceable to, the average English speaker. Anyway, so this nation, this is also nations, of course. This nation, Tiage, I was going to say, am I saying that right? But as if anybody would know. Tiage is not just Tiage, it's the Free People's Commonwealth of Tiage. Its ruler is Roichie Gaye Favwub, and he is a writer. They have no money, they have 28 morale, and if we click on army, for example, we can see their structure of their army. We can see that their base unit is a ranged unit. It has 2 strength, 1 health, 2 discipline. It's typically ranged 13 wide and 6 deep. Doesn't have any upgrades yet, and these stats are that it's never done anything because, no time has ever passed. Culture, there's no art because no time has passed. People, there's the writer. City, the one city. Trade, war, nope. Events, it was founded. Really not much. So I'm going to start running it, and then I'm going to talk about more stuff. First thing to note, you can obviously see that there's a lot of events happening over here, but more importantly, I'm going to talk about how this works. So there's basically, this program generates a fake world with some terrain and several starting nations. In the moment it generates 8 at the very beginning, and then it just kind of simulates history. So there's 5 basic components. There's nations, there's cities, there's armies, there's religions, and there's notable people. There's other things that I'm sure I've forgotten, but those are the main things. So nations are pretty much just a confederation of cities with a ruler who doesn't really do anything, but still technically the ruler. there's also a number of notable people who are part of that nation, and who are people like writers, artists, heroes, priests, whatever. They'll create works of art, and they're also ahem. So I found another bug. Anyway, luckily I have fixed it though, and now we will continue talking about what we were previously talking about. So, notable people, or notable people in nations. I'm going to go more in depth later, but they just do things for the nation or they create art. Nations also create treaties with other nations, which I will show you. So if you double click on one of these nations, you can go to the trade section. For example, you can see that the Khanate of Ayahuk is trading with Tiaozhek and Kavoyasjem, and they're at war with Ki, them, and them. Yeah. Right now there's only two kinds of treaties. There's trade treaties and there's declarations of war, and they both last forever. I'm going to work on that, but I'm also working on a lot of other things, because there's just a lot of stuff that I want to do, So, yes, I will eventually improve on that. Eventually treaties will end, there'll be more kinds of treaties, there'll be alliances, non-aggression pacts, all sorts of crap. But for right now, trade treaties, declarations of war, because I think those are the two most important things. So cities, which are the basic building blocks of nations, each have their own army, although the army is controlled by the nation, not the city. So the idea is that all nations start out as city-states. So each nation is just one city when the world is generated, and then as time progresses, they eventually conquer more cities, or they found more cities and become a nation. As this happens, fun fact, the name of the nation will change. So, for example, you can see this is the Principality of Coavaziem and Iuzio. That means that they must have conquered this second city at some point, because they only started out with this city. So their name changes when they get more territory, and also their basic type of government. So the principality part, or like the Free People's Republic, or whatever, that can all change, and eventually the name can actually completely change, so it has no part of the original name, which kind of makes it hard to keep track of, but I like it, so I'm going to leave it. And also, each city has a number of buildings in it. These buildings are things like houses, marketplaces, research labs, farms, and all of that stuff that you would expect to find in a city of this, extremely nondescript time period. I don't know what time period this is. It's kind of like the beginning of the world, but also they have like metal and stuff, so it's just kind of like whatever. But not modern times. So anyway, they have these buildings in them, and also each city can have a mix of religions in it, although typically they only have one religion at the moment because of how the way that religion spreading works, which is to say it doesn't really spread very much. But I'm going to work on that later too, of course. The final thing to note is that the place that the cities are founded on affects their productivity. So, for example, if it's founded by water, they'll be able to grow more food. If it's founded like on a desert or something, they won't be able to grow as much food. Obvious stuff like that. So, as you can see right now, there's a lot of like combat stuff. So I'm going to explain kind of what this is. First thing to know is that armies are made up of several tiers of troops. So there's a base type, which is like the garrison type. That would be this type. They're the weakest troops. You can think of them as conscripts or levies or volunteers or slaves, whatever makes you happy. And they're typically drawn from the city at the time the army is dispatched, or at the time that the army needs to defend. So that's obviously only applicable if you're, defending. And they're typically the weakest troops, and then the higher tiers are like the professional elite soldiers whose entire job is to fight. They're often far superior to the rest of the troops. For example, you can watch these people, they'll probably kill a whole bunch of them, maybe even the whole unit, yeah. So not quite, but they did kill a bunch of them, way more than any, typical levy would have. And you can see these people just took a whole volley from these troops here. However, it's still very hard to just completely overwhelm people when they have 5 times more than you, and that's reflected in the way that these battles are run. Both armies fight to the death, which is, I know, not realistic, but one, easier, by a lot, and two, it's kind of more satisfying that way than just seeing like 20% killed and then everyone just runs away. Um, However, if they have thousands of people, you will not see thousands of people on the screen. You will see reinforcements, for example, for this side is 737 and for this side is 380. This means that as people are killed on both sides, more troops will suddenly pop in. That's obviously, or maybe not obviously, but that's because having 2,000 or 3,000 or even 1,000 troops on the screen at the same time can make the game run way too slowly as you see people popping in. Each troop has 2 weapons and a type of armor. However, only ranged troops actually use both types of weapons. They use the ranged weapon, obviously, at range, and when they still have ammo, and they switch to the melee weapon if they run out of ammo or if the enemy troops get too close, which you probably have seen so far if you've been watching the battles. However, the types of weapons that the troops of a nation can have are limited by that nation. Each nation has a limited pool of weapons that it can choose from. I did this so that each nation sort of has its thing, like, you think of the Romans, they have gladiuses, they have javelins, but they don't just have, like, well, what don't they have? They don't have, like, you don't think of Romans as really using longbows. Like, the auxiliaries maybe, but not the Romans themselves, so you get that sort of like sense of a nation, because because I find that sometimes the nations are a little too generic and they're too similar, so you have to kind of focus on giving them things that make them different from other nations, so you can root for one side. At any rate, there's a bunch of types of weapons. If you want to see like the stats of the weapons, I think the complete updated stats are currently on the GitHub page. It's just a giant table. And I'd be happy to talk about weapons and stuff with people if you want, but not right now. So I'm going to go on to the next topic, which is religions. So religions really have a pretty limited use at the moment. They're mostly just for flavor, but they do have one important function, which is determining the tolerance of the nations that have people who adhere to that religion. So tolerance affects how likely a nation is to go to war and how likely it is to trade. Higher tolerance means it is less likely to go to war and more likely to trade. Tolerance is, well, one, it's a base stat for the religion, but two, it also depends on the religion. So there's monotheistic and polytheistic religions. Monotheistic religions just have the base stat. Polytheistic religions are different. Each god in a polytheistic religion has a significance number and also a number of domains, which are things like fire, water, sky, that sort of stuff. And depending on how important and what type of gods are in the religion depends how tolerant the nation is. So, for example, if a nation has, if their chief god is a god of death, fire, and thunder, they're probably not going to be, that keen on peace. And if their main god is, a god of peace and, love and fertility or whatever, they'll probably be more keen on peace. However, that's not to say that the opposite can't be true, because it can, because the base tolerance can make it so that any religion is pretty tolerant, or any religion is pretty intolerant. So they're just tendencies, not a complete rule, but a pretty solid rule. And finally, notable people. As I mentioned before, notable people include types of people. They're like generals, priests, artists, composers, and scientists, and that sort of people. Some people, like the general and the hero, currently have literally no purpose. They don't do anything. I plan on obviously having generals lead armies and having heroes do things like duels and probably go on quests so that people actually have something to write about instead of just making up random crap. But the majority of them, the oracle, the artist, the writer, the composer, the philosopher, the scientist, and the historian, will produce works of art. Obviously, I'm using works of art as like a very broad term. Like oracles, you don't normally think of as making art. Their form of art is prophecies. But there's a lot of different forms of art that these various people can do, which includes like things like paintings, sketches, statues, plays, novels, poems, essays, musicals, historical and scientific essays, and, as I said before, prophecies. But other people, like the administrator, the priest, the revolutionary, and the scientist, they boost various aspects of the nation. For example, scientists increase research rate, administrators increase the tax rate, or they increase the taxes collected, not the tax rate, which is, I guess, technically different. and revolutionaries make people less happy with the current regime, making it more likely for there to be revolts. And that's pretty much the basics. There's a lot more, like there's things that I haven't said, but to be 100% honest, I don't remember everything that's in this simulation, because there's a lot of stuff I've added, and I'm doing this for about a year and a half-ish. Not consistently, obviously, because then I would have more, and maybe I should do it more consistently, but it's kind of hard to get back into it after you've been out of it for a long time, and it's kind of hard to get into it when you're not, into it. At any rate, I do plan on making a much more comprehensive video at some point. I'm just not really sure when. Chances are it'll be like another year, because, it's about how long it took me to make this one, but, we'll see. So in the meantime, if you have any suggestions, or you find any bugs, please let me know in comments or in the forum thread, and thanks for watching.